odds are you have some 24 firsts, or you are looking to acquire or trade some 24 firsts. So today we're going to talk about the best strategy in Dynasty and how to deal with those future picks when you are a year out from the actual draft. First, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit like on the video. Those are the easiest ways to support our channel, and they're completely free. So we really appreciate you doing that. And make sure you check out our locals pages where all of our rankings, our ADP data, our exclusive articles, etc., are going to be on there. So make sure you go check that out as well. 24. Wow, here we go. The 24 class is already the next best class ever. And, you know, it's every single year.
Wait until next January when everyone says it's a really underwhelming class.
And everybody says, but 25. Now 25. So it is kind of funny. We'll start by saying this. Every class is the next best class. Every class is the generational class. Everybody wants to use the word generational for freaking everything. So
you have no idea until like 7 years down the road.
And,
so no,
and
2014 was special.
People are actually saying this about 23. 23 is a very good class, but people definitely said about 22, and 22 actually ended up being a fairly good class. I mean, from the wide receivers position especially, there were some really solid guys. Like, if you traded, you know...
Go ahead. Keep going.
You just talk about it. Tell me why. Tell me why you're making that face.
I would just say I think the difference between 2023 and other classes is while people are some people could be shorting 2023, I do think that's wrong, and I do think 2023 is more loaded than normal. It's very, very deep, and if you did any research like 2 or 3 years ago, you knew this. You knew that 2022 was going to be, you know, like any other normal class probably, and maybe a little bit less deep. And you knew that 2023 was going to be loaded. Like, I knew this back in 2020.
So now,
I was targeting 23 first a little bit too early, but I'm just saying.
But now,
there are some classes that you should look forward to a little more than others.
We're at the point where people are looking at 23 first, especially the later 23 first, and they're like, oh, this class sucks. So now they're like, but 24 first. So now I guess we're to the point now, because we are in March of, you know, the draft cycle for 2023. We have to start thinking about 2024. And what you're doing with 2024 picks really, really matters. So let's talk about something right off the bat here. This is something that I learned a lot last season when I was doing a bunch of startups, and then I've really implemented this season, and I haven't done it at all. Last season in startups, when I was doing, you know, drafting my startup teams in this same time period, I would go and I would trade my 23 first, the one a year away, and I would try to stack my roster. So essentially, I'd come out with the startup out of the startup drafts, like, oh, I have all this roster, blah blah. Plus Stephon Diggs, I traded my 23 first for, you know, I and a 8th round pick for a 4th, and I got Stephon Diggs or whatever. And I'd come out of these startup drafts, I'm like, wow, I'm really sitting pretty. But what I've learned, I mean, everybody knows this, but the 24 picks, the graph is going to look like this. I mean, we are still, it's not too late to buy into these 24 first until people get down on the class, which usually comes like a couple months before the draft. So until like a year from now, these 24 firsts are going to keep increasing in value. So not only is it smart to hold on to your 24 firsts in startup drafts for that reason, but also if you're going to move your first, make sure you're contending first. You may think you're contending coming out of the startup draft, but you don't actually know that until you get into the season, you see what your team does. The second advantage to that is you can hand pick a player that is already producing instead of trying to guess which player is going to produce coming out of the startup draft. So that's kind of what I've done. I'm curious to know, have you held on, Simon, to your 24 first in your startup drafts this year like I have?
Absolutely. I think the worst thing you can do for your teams, I mean, I've learned this from making my own mistake, but is sending away your future first in a startup. You have no idea what your team's going to look like. You know, last year you could have been drafting Matt Stafford in the 3rd round and Derek Carr in the 6th and being like, oh, look, I have my good QBs and I got Najee Harris and DeAndre Swift at the 1-2 turn, and you trade away your 23 first to get Deebo Samuel in the, you know, whatever in the 3rd round like he was going last year, and then you're like, well, that 23 first ended up being a top 3 pick because you never know. On paper, that team a year ago looked great. Yep. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's going to get hurt. You don't know who's going to just wipe out and not be a good fantasy asset anymore. Things happen. So I really think the worst thing you could be doing is sending that away. You're kind of just setting yourself up for underperforming. I think you're trading that at its peak value or at its lowest value. It's probably going to raise, and you're really undercutting yourself. You could wait until midseason and just have a lot wiser allocation.
Yeah, I feel like there are some situations, though, where, I mean, that is the cost of being a contender, and that's why Dynasty is so much fun and so fascinating, is there's almost this conflicting sort of battle between, do you really want to take advantage of the market, or do you want to win championships? Because a lot of times those contradict each other. They don't go together well if you don't build correctly. I think there are some situations, especially, I mean, injury is a big reason why people will have to overpay to go make a run in their championship for the championship in the late off season. Is, you know, if you feel like what's going to put you over the edge to go win the championship is an elite level tight end. So you go get, like I did this specifically last year. I think I paid a 24 first for Dallas Goedert. And that ended up really not doing well for me because Goddard got hurt.
Right.
And he didn't come back and start producing at a decent level until like I had already been eliminated because my weak link was not having an elite tight end. I took my shot on Goddard. He got injured. That really sucked. That happens. Ultimately, was it worth it? I think you have to be wise when you know that when you know as a contender that you're going to sell your 24 first, like looking back at 2022, you're in the middle of the season, all you have left are 24 first, I'm going to give it up for some sort of contending asset. You need to be pretty confident that a year and a half down the road, they're not going to lose too much value. And I think for selling a single first, I think an elite tight end is definitely a safe option to go and target because they last so much longer and they usually don't just fall off and lose a ton of value, with the exception of a guy like Darren Waller.
Yeah.
But that's sort of my thoughts on that. I am very, very hesitant as a contender ever to package future first together to get an elite contending asset. Just pay a first, just pay a second and get pure production and hopefully win your championship. It's not always going to work out. It's actually probably more often than not going to fail because, again, you have probably 4 legitimate contenders every single year, and only one of them wins, and it's all luck and it's all dependent on injury. So,
and there are gonna be some exceptions to this rule. There are times where you should move your 24 first when people get too high on them this early in the process. We're going to do a pick versus player and kind of tell you who would we be moving these for. I think Simon made a really good point. I had a team last year that I want to read for you. Team consisted of these players: Elijah Mitchell, Brandon Cooks, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Kyle Pitts, DJ Moore, Alec Pierce, CeeDee Lamb, Javonte Williams, and Travis Etienne.
Yeah.
That pick was the 102, I think, and I traded my 23 first to stack my wide receiver room because it was cool, and then I couldn't get my 1 and 2 back. I ended up having to blow the team up. There were some more contending assets on that team too. I think I had some older running backs as well, and I was stuck because I didn't have my own pick. Like, if I would have just waited and I would have just seen if my team actually panned out, make sure everybody's not a bust, I'd still have my pick. I'd be building around Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and I'd be looking better going into next year. Instead, I had to kind of rebuild my team without my own pick. I mean, I lost a significant amount of value. That's equivalent to almost a first or second round startup draft right now because I decided I wanted to sell my pick early.
And I'd assume you probably sold that before the season started because, if you would have waited until week 3 or 4 to sell your pick, you would have figured out Etienne was kind of playing with J-Rob, Javonte was already out, Mac Jones was not doing well, Zach Wilson was still out, and,
DJ Moore was the same as he's always been.
Yeah. And we're not advocating for not selling your first. I think Avery and I are saying don't sell your first at week -20.
Yes.
Because during the offseason, who cares what your roster needs are? I have people send me trade offers all the time, and they'll be like, looks like you need a running back. I'm going to send you Derrick Henry for the 105. And I'm like, I don't care if I need a running back. I have one. There's a team where I have 0 running backs, and people will try to send me offers like really lopsided because they're like, you just have team need. You don't have team need. You do not have team need right now. It's the offseason.
You don't need anything.
You need value. That's what you need.
Yes.
You can trade for a running back later. You can trade for whatever position later. Right now, just get your value.
You're gonna roll, my man. Yeah, it's literally perfectly. So well said, man. Wow.
Let's just end it.
Future takes.
If you have 24 firsts right now at this moment today, do not let go of them. That's what we're saying. If you had 24 firsts in 2022 during the season and you were a contender and you moved off of that 24 first to get a contending asset who you assume is probably going to maintain their value for the foreseeable future, that's fine. You have to do what you have to do.
So another, focus that I want to kind of talk about here is rebuilding teams where you either made that mistake or even rebuilding teams when you didn't. Because I have a rebuilding team or two where I did make that mistake. Again, I have not done it in any of my startups this year, and I will not do it. I have all my 24 firsts. I will keep them. But the ones that I made that mistake in last year, I have gone about rebuilding in kind of a funny way. I tried to rebuild my teams in December and January. And the reason I did this was because I knew come February and March, the 24 first would skyrocket in value. But you don't understand. In August, the 24 firsts are going to be worth even 20 to 30% more than they are now. But in December, I got them even 10 to 20% cheaper than they are at this moment. So I built all my rebuilds. Like when I was going and selling everybody for picks, like you should on a rebuild, I was going and getting 24 firsts. I was skipping over the 23 class and going for 24 firsts.
Yeah, not being desperate and trying to get your own early first back. Just if you can, do it. But, it's not a bad thing to kick the can down the road and try to get someone else's future early first.
Yeah, in Dynasty, especially as a rebuild, you're not trying to build your team like an NFL GM who's trying to go through the draft and draft all the guys that you believe in and think have talent and then keep them forever. It is purely a market value game when you are rebuilding. And all you're doing, regardless of whether you believe or don't believe in a player, I personally don't really believe long-term in Trey Lance, but if I'm rebuilding, even in some of my contending teams, all I can do is buy Trey Lance. Like, I can't stop doing it. And I know you guys have been doing that as well. Treylon Burks is another one of those guys because they will at least maintain their value.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you just have to call your shots on some of those guys. I think like you guys have been talking about 2024. I want to hear some of your rosters. Like you gave an example, Avery, about one of your rosters that did not pan out well, and then you had to rework your process. Simon, do you have a roster on you right now where you've sort of had to do a similar thing where you thought you were going to contend, you sort of put yourself in a pickle, and then you had to reroute your philosophy in that league? Because I know I have one. I'll do one after you.
Yeah, I'll pull up my roster here. I think this was probably week 7 or 8. I was leading the league in max points for. I mean, my team was really good. I had Daniel Jones and Kyler Murray, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, Treylon Burks, Tyreek Hill, Amari Cooper, George Kittle, Marquise Brown. I mean, I had Trey Lance on the bench, and so I was like, let me go ahead and trade my 23 first. I think I went out and I got D-Hop. No, I had D-Hop. I ended up selling him later in the year. I went out and got D-Hop and a couple other pieces for a 23 first. I forget the exact trade. I ended up losing out like my last 4 weeks with some injuries and just playing the best teams at the wrong time. And so that first that I traded ended up becoming the 106 because I led the league in max points for, and that's how we determined the pick order, and I still missed out on the playoffs.
Wow.
So before, like the day before the trade deadline hit, I started going and trying to sell my players for 24 firsts. I ended up getting 3 24 firsts by selling D-Hop and Cooper Kupp and a couple other guys, just some Miles Sanders, I think, and then landed 3 24 firsts. But it's like you never know what's going to happen. You hear that Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 1, Travis Etienne, who was doing really well towards the end of the year, Kyler Murray, QB1, in points per game. All these players doing really well, and it can just disappear. You never know what's going to happen.
You got another one?
Yeah. This is probably my worst roster. I even had to ask a couple people. I had to ask you and Jeremy about this because I was like, I am not stuck, but like, should I even? DD5, yeah. So my board looked like this. Okay, I started with Dak and CD. That was pretty cool.
Okay.
I ended up getting I invested in Debo heavily and Aaron Rodgers. Those were 2 of the guys that I very heavily invested in last season, and boy did it kill me in this league specifically. I took Rodgers in the 4th, Debo in the 3rd. I took Deontay Johnson, Darren Waller at the 6-11. I had questions about Darren Waller. I kind of wanted this league to sort of be my contingency plan if I was wrong about my major opinions. Waller was one of those guys where I was like, I'll take my shot there. Didn't work out. Elijah Mitchell, Brandon Ayuk, Devin Singletary, Damian Harris, Rondell Moore, Irv Smith, Logan Thomas, Hines, et cetera, et cetera. All these guys just completely
Rip.
Almost all of them have lost value.
Yeah, Pierce is probably the only hit there.
Yeah, and I kind of went into desperation mode in the middle of the season, and one of my biggest mistakes was this is what I would recommend to you guys too. Don't get caught up in the moment in mid-season trades when you think you need to do something that you really don't. Don't try to be a contender mid-season and don't lie to yourself about it. If you're like, oh, I just need this extra player, oh, I just need to move this elite asset around and lose a ton of value, don't do it. It completely destroyed me. I traded, I got Kyler Murray, and then I got Montgomery, Boyd, Cooks, and Hopkins, all guys that end up losing value. And I gave up Dak and CD and Ayuk with Mitchell and Cooper Rush on top of that too, because I thought I was going to be able to contend. Kyler ends up tearing his ACL.
Oh, Nathan.
D-Hop, I thought I was buying D-Hop at a value, and he ended up not really increasing in value at all. It ended up being a really bad deal. I thought the gap between Kyler Murray and Dak was that significant that I was actually doing a fair deal. So don't make huge deals where you're packaging a bunch of players like that together, because that just looks terrible later. Actually, back then, there was a lot of people were kind of all over the place on that deal, but it looked like a pretty fair deal in the moment, or at that point. It did. But that's just all that to say. There's way too much risk in doing something like that, especially mid-season. And now I'm in a situation where I've made some really good deals market value wise, and I'm now back to Deshaun, Kyler, and Trey Lance as my 3 QBs, which there is a ton of value there. I don't have much anywhere else. I'm stuck with Amari, Mike Williams, and Deontay Johnson at the wide receiver position because they're not sells right now. I shouldn't be moving them off my roster, and I shouldn't be in a rush to. But that is definitely what I would recommend at that point. But again, I've put myself in a situation there that really sucks.
All right, so back to the picks. In looking ahead, another year, 25 picks, you shouldn't be moving 25 picks right now. You shouldn't ever move picks 2 years in advance anyways, unless it's like some ridiculous steal.
If someone's offering you a 25
look,
first,
if it's in a deal for one of these top quarterbacks or one of the top 2 wide receivers, then we can see it. But don't be moving your 25 first to get the 101 this year. You're trading picks 2 years in advance for a pick this year. Even though it's Bijan, Bijan's a pick. Like, that's the 101. Don't be moving your, and 26 firsts are going to hit sleeper in the next couple months. Please do not trade your 20. If you're a commissioner, every time somebody trades one of those, they need to pay their buy-in for that year, because that's going to, number one, it's going to increase the longevity of the league. It's going to prevent people from just trading all their picks, stacking their teams, flopping and bailing. So, I mean, that's a good idea in itself. But honestly, from a dynasty strategy standpoint, it's really bad strategy. You don't know what your team's going to look like 2 years from now. I mean,
you don't know what your league's going to look like.
It's actually bad practice to. And look, if your team is really a contender, I don't think you need to trade your picks to trade your first that year. I mean, for somebody that's going to help you. Like, if your team is really, really contending, it's with as much luck as fantasy is, how much of an edge is it going to give you to go get one more guy that produces? I mean, unless it's something crazy, it's not. Like, I did trade a 24 first maybe for Austin Eckler, like at the end of the season, and I won the league because of it. So there are, but Austin Eckler was a league winner, and I knew it, and he was 22 points per game. It was a sure thing. So in terms of that, let's real quick, a pick versus player. Very general here. If you are going to trade your 24 first, who would you trade him for? Well, I'd say this. If you have an early 23 first, if you have a bad team, do not trade if you even have a hint that your team is going to suck, don't do it. It's a chance at the 101. Caleb Williams is going to be worth so much. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be worth so much. Please do not trade anything that you project to be anything higher than like the 6. If you are very, very confident, which there are scenarios where you're very confident that you have a late 23 first, what kind of packages you guys like looking at, even considering trading your 24 first for in that scenario? And it's hard for me because honestly, unless I'm getting like a top 35 asset in Dynasty, I'm not really looking to trade those picks at all.
And
I agree.
Before we answer this, can I just say one tiny thing about that too? I think when you are considering trading 24 firsts, a lot of people in our leagues, in our Discord, in our comments have asked like, hey, this I'm going to get this projected, or I'm giving up this projected mid to early 24 first. No, that's not how it works. You have no idea what your team that you're trading with is going to look like when you get that 24 first, you always assume that it's late. You always do.
100%.
Well, I always assume the 24 firsts I'm getting are late, and if I'm giving one up,
Yes.
I honestly assume it might be early.
Yeah, that's exactly how you should do it. Yeah, that it's just all.
That's-
if you're getting them, assume they're late. If you're sending them, assume they're
And
early.
sometimes it leads to people saying you overvalue your own picks, but it's like, what would I target in a 24 first? I'm thinking like, I want to trade my 24 first for Saquon Barkley. Or, and someone might be like, oh, he's worth more than that. And I'm like, well, what if my pick ends up being the 104 and 24? I you know?
And some people will say we've come full circle with this because we've been notorious pick sellers. Here's the thing: we still are. We're just not pick sellers a year in advance.
Just
We're
the
pick
right
sellers
time.
during the right process, like during that part of the process.
Yeah.
Like right now, there are some really good deals you can make for a 23 first. Really good deals. Now, granted, sometimes you just have to kind of play the market because the market as a whole right now is down on the 23 class more than it was before. Now we're seeing some good values because this is a good class. So it just depends. But honestly, 24 first, what you should do right now, you should hold your 24 first or you should be acquiring them. I'm not looking to sell, and I think all of us can agree we're not really looking to sell our 24 first in Dynasty Fantasy Football, so make sure you hold on to them. All right, that's going to wrap it up. Make sure you let us know what you think of the video in the comments. Make sure you hit like and make sure you subscribe. Those are two easy ways to support us, and they're completely free. And make sure you go to our locals page. You can get our rankings, ADP data, live streams, mock drafts, listener leagues, etc. So make sure you head over there and get all of our exclusive content as well. As always, we appreciate you listening. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.